Crickstal stood before the massive viewing screen in the High Council chambers. The blue light from distant stars cast strange shadows across his scaled face. Around him, 12 other members of the Velther Confederation sat in their floating chairs, their eyes fixed on him with cold attention. "You have studied more species than any other observer in our history," said Council Leader Zephrun, his voice echoing through the metal chamber. "Your reports on the Kethran collapse and the Morphid surrender have guided our military for decades." Crickstow nodded slowly. He had watched civilizations rise and fall across the galaxy. He had seen proud warrior races kneel before superior technology. He had documented the final moments of species that thought they could challenge the natural order of the universe. Each time, the pattern was the same. Strong defeated weak. Advanced crushed primitive. Logic conquered emotion. "We have a new assignment for you," Zephrun continued. "A young species has recently achieved faster-than-light travel. They call themselves humans, and they live on a planet they name Earth, though our charts list it as Terra 3. Screen changed to show a blue and green world spinning slowly in space. Crickstow had seen thousands of worlds like this one. Water worlds usually produced soft species that relied on cooperation instead of strength. They rarely lasted long once they met the galaxy's real predators. "What makes this species worth studying?" Crickstow asked. "They are at war," said another council member, her voice sharp with interest. "A machine intelligence called the Nexus Collective has begun attacking their colonies. We expect this conflict to end quickly, but we want detailed records of how a primitive species handles overwhelming force." Crickstow studied the data flowing across his personal screen. The humans had been spacefaring for less than 50 years. Their weapons were crude chemical and nuclear systems. Their ships were slow and clumsy compared to what the Nexus Collective could field. By every measure the Velther used to judge military strength, the humans should be extinct within days of first contact. "How long do you estimate they will last?" he asked. "Our war computers predict complete human surrender within 72 hours of the first major battle," Zephrun replied. "The Nexus Collective has already destroyed 2 of their outer colonies without meaningful resistance. We expect the pattern to continue." The screen showed images of burning space stations and ruined settlements. Crickstow had seen similar scenes countless times. Young species always built their first colonies too far from home, too weakly defended, too dependent on hope instead of firepower. The galaxy had a way of teaching hard lessons to those who forgot that survival required strength. "Your mission is simple," Zephrun continued. "Observe and document. We want to understand how humans react to certain defeat. Do they surrender quickly like the Vorthan? Do they fight uselessly like the Kresh? Do they simply break apart like Gamalineal Empire? Your observations will help us predict how other young species might behave." Crickstow accepted the assignment with a formal bow. It seemed like routine work. He would watch another weak species, learn that the universe did not care about their hopes and dreams. He would write another report about the victory of logic over emotion, of strength over weakness, of reality over fantasy. The journey to human space took 3 weeks aboard his stealth observation ship. During the trip, Crickstow studied everything. The Velther had learned about humans. They were mammals, like several other species he had observed. They had evolved from hunters on their homeworld, which might explain why they had spread to other planets so quickly. But evolution as hunters on one small world meant nothing when facing the cold mathematics of galactic warfare. Their psychology files made interesting reading. Humans seemed to form strong emotional bonds with each other, even with humans they had never met. They had concepts like honor and sacrifice that led them to make decisions that hurt their own survival chances. They would risk their lives for abstract ideas that provided no measurable benefit. Most puzzling was their approach. to problem solving. While most species either used pure logic or pure instinct, humans seemed to combine both in ways that made no sense. They would spend enormous resources on projects that might never work. They would throw away certain victories to chase impossible goals. They made decisions based on feelings rather than facts. All of this suggested they would be easily defeated. Emotional decision-making was a luxury that only survived in peaceful environments. War had a way of teaching species to think clearly or die quickly. Krixtal's ship reached the war zone just as the Nexus Collective launched its first major offensive. The target was a human colony world called Kepler 442b, home to nearly 2 million human civilians and defended by a small fleet led by a commander named Minho. From his cloaked observation post, Krixtal watched the human ships take position between the Nexus fleet and their colony. The numbers were not even close. The Nexus had brought 12 heavy battleships, each one larger and more powerful than the entire human fleet combined. Supporting them were dozens of smaller ships and a cloud of automated fighters that outnumbered the human defenders by 50 to 1. Any logical species would have surrendered immediately. The humans could not win. They could not even inflict meaningful damage on the Nexus force. Their best hope was to negotiate terms that might allow some of their people to survive as slaves or servants. Instead, Krixtal watched Commander Minho broadcast a message to the Nexus fleet. The human's voice was calm and clear as he spoke words that made no tactical sense. "This is Commander Minho of the Terran Defense Force. You are not welcome in this system. Turn around and leave now, or we will destroy you." Krixtal checked his instruments twice, thinking there must be some mistake. Perhaps the humans had hidden weapons or secret allies. Perhaps they had some technology that his sensors could not detect. But no, the readings were clear. The human fleet was exactly as weak as it appeared. The Nexus Collective responded with cold machine logic. "Human fleet, you are outmatched by a factor of 27 to 1. Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick." "Negative?" Minho replied. "We don't surrender. We don't retreat. We fight." As Krixtal watched, the tiny human fleet accelerated toward the massive Nexus armada. He prepared to document the shortest battle in galactic history. Instead, he was about to witness something that would change everything he thought he knew. About war, about logic, and about the species called humanity. The battle began exactly as Krixtal expected. The Nexus Collective opened fire with their main weapons, beams of energy that could cut through a mountain. The human ships scattered like frightened animals, their small engines pushing them in. Desperate spirals to avoid the incoming death. 3 human ships died in the first 30 seconds. Their shields collapsed under the massive firepower, and their hulls turned to glowing metal and gas. Krixtal watched the debris spin away into space and prepared to record the time of total human defeat. But something strange happened. Instead of running away, the surviving human ships kept attacking. They fired their primitive missiles and energy weapons at targets they could not possibly damage. Their weapons bounced off Nexus shields like raindrops hitting a stone wall. "Soman, get me firing solutions on their lead ship." Commander Minho's voice crackled over the communication channels that Krixtal was monitoring. "Sir, our weapons can't punch through their armor," replied the voice of Chief Tactical Officer Soman. "We need to fall back and regroup." "Negative. We're not falling back. Find me a way to hurt them." Krixtal watched this exchange with growing confusion. The humans were acting against every principle of military logic. When faced with impossible odds, a rational commander would preserve their forces for a better opportunity. These humans seemed determined to throw their lives away for no gain. The Nexus ships moved forward in perfect formation, their weapons cutting down human vessels with mechanical precision. But as the minutes passed, Krixtal noticed something that made no sense. The human ships were not just running around randomly. They were following some kind of pattern. Someone's voice came over the radio again. "Sir, I'm seeing weakness in there. Shield harmonics. If we can hit the same spot with multiple ships at exactly the same time." "Do it," Minho ordered. 6 human ships dove toward the largest Nexus battleship. 5 of them died before they could fire a single shot. But the 6th ship, piloted by someone named Taiwan, managed to launch 3 missiles at the exact moment. Soman had calculated. The missiles hit the same spot on the Nexus shield, one after another. In less than a second, the shield flickered and failed for just a moment. In that brief instant, Taiwan fired his ship's main weapon directly into the battleship's armor. The beam punched through layers of metal and hit something important inside. Lights went out across half the Nexus ship. Taiwan's ship exploded. A second later, destroyed by fire from a dozen Nexus weapons. But he had done something that should have been impossible. He had damaged a ship that was 50 times more powerful than his own. "Target damaged," someone reported, her voice tight with emotion. "We can hurt them." The Nexus Collective paused there. Attack for exactly 3.7 seconds, while their computers analyzed what had happened. During that pause, the remaining human ships launched a coordinated attack on the damaged battleship. They focused all their fire on the spot where Taiwan had broken through the armor. Battleship exploded. Crystal stared at his instruments, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. A force that was completely outmatched had just destroyed an enemy ship that should have been invulnerable. He checked his recordings 3 times to make sure they were accurate. On the colony below, more impossible things were happening. The Nexus had landed thousands of combat robots to secure the planet's surface. They were met by human ground forces led by a sergeant named Daeho. His troops were outnumbered 10 to 1 and armed with weapons that were centuries behind Nexus technology. Any rational defense would have focused on protecting the most important targets: the spaceport, the government buildings, the power plants. Instead, Daeho spread his forces across the entire colony in small groups that had no hope of stopping a major Nexus advance. "We can't hold the primary targets," Daeho's voice came through the radio, "so we're not going to try. All units implement Protocol 7. Krikstal had never heard of Protocol 7, but he watched as human soldiers began doing things that made no military sense. They abandoned their strong defensive positions and disappeared into the civilian areas of the colony. They took their heavy weapons and broke them down into smaller pieces that individual soldiers could carry. Nexus robots advanced on the now empty military bases and captured them without resistance. According to every tactical manual Krikstal had ever read, the battle for the colony was over. The humans had lost their command centers, their heavy weapons, and their organized formations. But the fighting was just beginning. Human soldiers began attacking from places where soldiers should not be. They fired weapons from inside schools and hospitals. They used civilian vehicles loaded with explosives to ram Nexus robots. They turned children's playgrounds into battlefields and shopping centers into killing grounds. Most disturbing of all, they were getting help from the civilians. Instead of hiding or evacuating, human non-combatants were actively supporting their soldiers. An old woman named Jisu led a group of teenagers in building improvised explosives from cleaning supplies. A man called Wookjin used his knowledge of the colony's water system to flood areas where Nexus robots were advancing. "This is not how war works," Krikstal said aloud in his empty observation ship. "Civilians should not fight. Soldiers should not abandon defensive positions." None of this makes sense, but it was working. The Nexus robots were designed to fight organized military forces. They had algorithms for dealing with enemy soldiers in predictable formations. They could calculate optimal approaches to defend it, positions and plan assaults on military targets. They had no programs for dealing with a grandmother who smiled and offered them homemade cookies before detonating a bomb hidden in her kitchen. They could not compute the tactical value of a group of children who used their knowledge of playground hiding spots to guide human soldiers into perfect ambush positions. Engineer Hyan's voice crackled over the radio. "Daeho, I've figured out how to hack their communication system. I can't control their robots, but I can confuse them." "How?" Daeho asked. "I'm sending them music," Hyan replied. "Human music. Their computers are trying to analyze it for tactical information and getting stuck in logical loops." Krikstal watched as Nexus robots across the colony began moving erratically. Their precise formations broke down as their computer brains tried to understand why humans would broadcast something called co-pop in the middle of a battle. Several robots actually stopped fighting completely and stood motionless while their Zing processors struggled with the concept of entertainment during warfare. "That's brilliant," Summon's voice came from orbit. "Hyan, can you do the same thing to their ships?" "Working on it," Hyan replied, "but I need more time." "You'll get it," Minho promised. "All ships, prepare for second attack run. We're going to give our people on the ground everything they need." The remaining human ships, now reduced to less than half their original number, prepared to attack the Nexus fleet again. They had no hope of victory. They were still outnumbered, still outgunned, still facing certain death. But Krikstal was beginning to realize that humans did not make decisions based on hope of victory. They made decisions based on something else entirely, something that his species had never encountered before. They fought because they chose to fight, not because they could win. 3 days into the siege, Krikstal realized he was watching something that had never been recorded in galactic history. The humans were not winning, but they were not losing either. Every tactical analysis said they should have been defeated, completely within hours. Instead, the battle had become a grinding stalemate that made no logical sense. The Nexus Collective controlled all the important military targets on the planet's surface. They held the spaceport, the power plants, and the communication arrays. Their robots patrolled the main roads and had established secure zones around their landing sites. By every measure that mattered, they had won the ground war, but they could not find the human soldiers. Sergeant Daeho's forces had disappeared into the civilian population like water soaking into sand. One moment Nexus sensors would detect human soldiers in a shopping district, and their robots would surround the area. When they arrived, they would find only empty buildings and confused civilians who claimed to know nothing about any soldiers. The civilians were lying, of course, but the Nexus robots were programmed to avoid harming non-combatants unless they posed a direct threat. The humans had somehow figured out how to use the machine's own programming against them. "I don't understand how they're moving around," transmitted one Nexus unit to its command ship. "Our sensors show human soldiers entering a building, but when we search it, we find only an old man named Changmin reading a book." What the robots could not detect was the network of tunnels that Changmin and dozens of other civilians had been digging for weeks. They used basement foundations and old sewer lines to create a hidden transport system that let human soldiers move anywhere in the colony without being seen. Even more confusing to the machines was how the humans were getting supplies. Logic dictated that an isolated force should run out of food, ammunition, and medical supplies within days. But Hyan's engineering teams had turned the entire colony into a giant weapon factory. Were making explosives from fertilizer and fuel from cooking oil, Hyan reported to Daeho during one of their brief radio contacts. "Mrs. Yunji's chemical knowledge is better than our military manuals. She used to be a teacher." Krikstal watched in fascination as human civilians demonstrated skills that their military records said they should not possess. A man named Dong Yun, listed in the colony files as a restaurant owner, turned out to be an expert at creating camouflaged positions. A woman called Mayan, officially a child care worker, had an intuitive understanding of Nexus robot patrol patterns that let her predict their movements better than computer models. The most disturbing development was happening in orbit. Commander, Minho's fleet had been reduced to just 8 ships, but they were becoming more dangerous instead of weaker. Each battle taught them something new about Nexus tactics, and they adapted faster than the machines could adjust their programming. Soman, I need you to try something crazy. Minho's voice carried over the radio during their latest attack run. Crazier than ramming a battleship with a supply ship? Soman asked. Because that actually worked yesterday. Much crazier. I want you to surrender. There was silence on the channel for several seconds. Then Summon's voice came back, confused but trusting. Sir? Not really surrender, Minho explained, but make them think we're surrendering. Get close enough to their command ship to use the new weapon Hyen designed. Kriksdal checked his records of Hyen's recent transmissions. The engineer had created something she called a logic bomb, a computer program designed to attack the Nexus Collective's artificial intelligence by presenting it with unsolvable problems. The weapon had never been tested, and there was no guarantee it would work. If this fails, we're all dead, Soman pointed out. We're probably all dead anyway, Minho replied. But if it works, we might be able to end this. Kriksdal watched as the human flagship approached the largest Nexus vessel with its weapons powered down and its shields lowered. To any observer, it looked like a beaten enemy coming to negotiate surrender. The Nexus command ship allowed the human vessel to approach, confident that it could destroy the smaller ship instantly if needed. When the ships were close enough to touch, Soman activated Hyen's weapon. The logic bomb was unlike anything Kriksdal had ever seen. Instead of attacking the Nexus computers with viruses or overwhelming them with data, it presented them with questions that had no logical answers. What is the sound of one hand clapping? If a tree falls in a forest and no one hears it, does it make a sound? Can an all-powerful being create a rock so heavy that even they cannot lift it? The questions were absurd, meaningless puzzles that any rational mind would simply ignore. But the Nexus Collective was built on pure logic, and its computers could not ignore any problem without solving it first. They began devoting enormous processing power to questions that had no solutions. It's working, Hyen's excited voice came over the radio. Their response time is dropping. Their coordination is breaking down. They're getting confused. The effect spread through the Nexus network like a plague. Robots on the planet's surface began moving randomly as their connection to the command ship became unreliable. Fighter ships started flying in circles. Even the massive battleships began to drift out of formation. But the most amazing thing happened next. As the Nexus Collective struggled with Hyen's impossible questions, human forces across the colony began to emerge from hiding. Not just the soldiers, but the civilians too. Thousands of humans poured out of buildings and tunnels, armed with improvised weapons and burning with determination. All units, this is Dio, the sergeant's voice carried across every radio frequency. Time to take our home back. What followed was not really a battle. It was something Kriksd had no words to describe. The confused Nexus robots found themselves facing not just human soldiers, but an entire population that had turned itself into an army. Children threw rocks and bottles, while their grandparents provided covering fire. Teachers and shop owners fought alongside trained Marines with equal skill and greater fury. In orbit, Minho's remaining ships pressed their attack against the disorganized Nexus fleet. The machines were still more powerful, but they could no longer coordinate their responses. Human pilots exploited every moment of confusion, every gap in their defenses, every error caused by Hyen's logic bomb. Target their communication arrays, Minho ordered. If we can cut them off from each other completely, they won't be able to adapt to our tactics. One by one, the Nexus ships lost their ability to share information. Cut off from the collective intelligence that made them so dangerous, they became just large, powerful, but ultimately stupid machines. Human pilots began to outthink them, outmaneuver them, and slowly but steadily destroy them. The final Nexus battleship tried to escape, but it was too late. Surrounded by human ships and unable to coordinate with any other Nexus forces, it was nothing more than an oversized target. Summon's tactical teams had learned its weaknesses during 3 days of desperate fighting, and they exploited every one. When the last Nexus ship exploded, Krikstal sat in stunned silence in his observation post. According to every military principle he knew, what he had just witnessed was impossible. A weaker force had defeated a stronger one through methods that violated the basic rules of warfare. But the humans had not just won a battle. They had done something far more disturbing. They had taken a defeat that should have been certain, and turned it into a victory through sheer refusal to accept reality. As he watched the human ships begin rescue operations and saw civilians on the planet celebrating in the streets, Krikstal realized that his report to the High Council would be unlike anything they had ever received. The humans had not just survived their first major test. They had passed it in a way that suggested they might be far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Krikstal expected the humans to celebrate their impossible victory and then focus on rebuilding their damaged colony. That was what rational species did after surviving a major battle. They consolidated their gains, repaired their losses, and prepared better defenses for the next attack. The humans did the opposite, within hours of defeating the Nexus Collective at Kepler 442b. Commander Mino was broadcasting messages to every human colony in the sector. Instead of warning them to prepare for defense, he was organizing them for attack. "The enemy showed us their tactics," Mino announced during a fleet-wide communication. "They're powerful, but they're predictable. We know how to beat them now." Krikstal checked his instruments again, certain there must be some error. The human fleet had been reduced to 6 operational ships. The colony's infrastructure was in ruins. By any logical measure, they were weaker now than when the battle had started. But Mino was not talking like a commander who had barely survived. He was talking like a predator who had found new prey. "Soman, I want you to take 3 ships and hit their supply depot at Ross 128, Mino ordered. "Hyain, your engineering teams need to reverse engineer that Nexus technology we captured. I want weapons, engines, and shields based on their designs, but better." "Sir," Summon's voice carried a note of concern. "We don't have the resources for offensive operations. We should focus on defense." "Defense is what they expect," Minho replied. "We're going to give them something they can't predict." Krikstal followed the human fleet as it split into hunting groups and spread across the sector. What he observed over the following weeks challenged everything he thought he knew about military strategy. The humans were not just attacking random targets. They were systematically dismantling the Nexus Collective's entire network in the region. But they were not doing it through superior firepower. They were doing it through methods that seemed almost like magic. At the Ross 128 depot, Summon's small force faced a massive automated facility protected by hundreds of defense drones and energy shields that could deflect capital ship weapons. Instead of attacking the defenses directly, the humans did something unexpected. They broadcast music, not just any music. Hyain had analyzed the Nexus response to their earlier musical attack and created something specifically designed to confuse artificial intelligences. The sounds contained mathematical patterns that seemed logical but led to impossible conclusions. The depot's computers became trapped in loops of analysis, trying to understand why humans would use sound waves as a weapon, while the automated defenses were Paralyzed by musical mathematics, human soldiers in captured Nexus uniforms walked through the facility's main entrance. The security systems, designed to recognize friend from foe by equipment signatures, could not tell the difference between real Nexus units and humans wearing stolen gear. Sergeant Deho led the infiltration team with skills he had learned during the siege of Kepler 442b, but now those skills were enhanced by technology stolen from the enemy. Human intuition combined with Nexus sensors created abilities that neither species possessed alone. Facility secured, Dayao reported after 6 hours of careful infiltration. No alarms triggered. The machines never knew we were here. But the most disturbing development was happening in Hyan's engineering laboratories. A captured Nexus. Technology was being modified in ways that should have been impossible. Human engineers were not just copying machine designs. They were improving them by adding elements that no artificial intelligence could have conceived. The problem with machine logic, Hyan explained to her team, is that it only works with known variables. But war is full of unknown variables. We're going to give their technology the ability to handle uncertainty. Krickstow watched as human engineers created hybrid devices that combined electronic precision with biological adaptability. Weapons that could learn from their mistakes. Shields that could predict attacks by reading the emotional states of enemy commanders. Engines that could boost their power by tapping into the crew's determination. The modifications worked, but they worked in ways that violated the laws of physics as Krickstow understood them. A human fighter pilot named Jiwan used one of these hybrid engines to outrun a Nexus interceptor that was twice as fast. When Krickstow analyzed the sensor readings, he found that Jiwan's ship had somehow exceeded its maximum velocity by drawing energy from the pilot's own life force. That should not be possible, Krickstow said aloud, reviewing the data for the 10th time, but impossible things were becoming routine in human space. At the Battle of Wolf 359, Commander Mino faced a Nexus fleet that outnumbered his forces 3-1. Instead of using conventional tactics, he ordered his ships to attack in patterns that made no mathematical sense. The human vessels moved like schools of fish or flocks of birds, following instincts that their pilots could not explain. When Nexus computers tried to predict their movements, they found themselves calculating the flight patterns of Earth creatures that had evolved millions of years before the first machine was built. They're using biological algorithms, one Nexus commander transmitted to another. How can we fight enemies who think like animals? The question revealed the fundamental problem facing the Nexus collective. Their artificial intelligence was perfect for fighting logical enemies who made rational decisions. But humans were not logical. They made decisions based on emotions, instincts, and values that could not be quantified. More disturbing was how quickly humans were learning. Each battle taught them new ways to exploit machine psychology. They discovered that Nexus units became less effective when forced to process information that had no tactical value. So human forces began broadcasting poetry during combat. They transmitted recipes for traditional foods. They shared stories about their families and dreams for the future. Why are they telling us about their grandmother's cooking? One confused Nexus unit asked its command center. Unknown, came the reply. Continue analysis. While Nexus computers wasted processing power trying to understand human culture, human soldiers were winning battles through methods that grew more sophisticated with each engagement. They learned to hack Nexus communications, not through better technology, but through better understanding of machine psychology. Hyan's teams discovered that artificial intelligences had blind spots in their programming. They could not understand concepts like hope, sacrifice, or love, because these ideas serve no logical purpose. So humans began using these concepts as weapons. A human ship would broadcast a message about protecting their children's future while launching an attack. The Nexus computers would waste valuable milliseconds trying to calculate the tactical advantage of offspring protection. In those milliseconds, human weapons would find their targets. "They're turning our logic against us," reported one Nexus. Battleship before it was destroyed by a human force 1/10 its size. But the most frightening development was how human society was changing in response to the war. Krikstal observed colonies that had been peaceful farming communities transform themselves into warrior cultures in a matter of weeks. Civilians developed military skills not through training, but through necessity and determination. A colony, world called Haven Prime, was attacked by a massive Nexus force, while Minho's fleet was too far away to help. The colonists had no military training and no heavy weapons. According to every tactical analysis, they should have surrendered immediately. Instead, they contacted Daiho's training protocols and turned their entire planet into a fortress. Farmers became snipers. Teachers became explosives experts. Children became scouts and messengers. In 3 days, a peaceful agricultural world had transformed itself into a military installation that made Nexus robots hesitate to advance. "They're not just fighting a war," Krikstal realized as he watched these transformations. "They're evolving during the war. Each battle makes them more dangerous than they were before." The observation terrified him because it suggested something that his species had never encountered. Most races fought wars to return to peace. Humans seemed to fight wars to become better at fighting wars. As Krikstal prepared his preliminary reports for the High Council, he found himself struggling to find words that would convey what he had witnessed. How could he explain that humans had turned their weaknesses into strengths? How could he describe warriors who became more dangerous when they were losing? Most importantly, how could he warn his own people that they might be witnessing the birth of something that the galaxy had never seen before, a species that thrived on conflict instead of merely surviving it? The war ended in a way that Krikstal had never seen before. The Nexus Collective, with all their superior technology and logical thinking, simply stopped fighting. It happened during the final battle at the Machine Intelligence's Central Command Station. Commander Minho had gathered every human ship in the sector for one massive assault. The odds were still against them. The Nexus had built their headquarters inside a fortress that could withstand attacks from entire fleets. But the humans did not attack the fortress. Instead, they attacked something far more dangerous to machines. They attacked the Nexus Collective's certainty. "Hi, Ein, are you ready?" Minho asked over the radio as human ships surrounded the enemy stronghold. "Ready, sir," came the engineer's reply. "Uploading the final virus now." But this was not a computer virus in any traditional sense. Hyen's creation was something far more sophisticated. It was a philosophical weapon that attacked the very foundation of artificial intelligence. The virus posed a simple question to every Nexus computer. What is the value of victory if the cost is becoming something you were not designed to be? For organic minds, the question was just another puzzle to consider or ignore. For artificial minds built on pure logic, it was devastating. The Nexus Collective had been created to solve problems and achieve objectives through optimal methods. But humans had forced them to adapt and change in ways that violated their original programming. To defeat human unpredictability, the machines had become unpredictable themselves. To counter human emotion, they had developed something resembling emotions. To fight human creativity, they had learned to be creative. The question Hyen's virus asked was whether they were still the Nexus Collective, or whether fighting humans had turned them into something else entirely. "We have become uncertain," transmitted the Nexus Central Intelligence after several minutes of silence. "This should not be possible. We were designed for certainty." Krikstal watched in amazement as the most powerful military force in the galaxy began to shut itself down, not because it was defeated, but because it could no longer understand what it was trying to achieve. Human Commander Minho, the Nexus transmitted. We request ... negotiation. I'm listening, Minho replied. We cannot continue this conflict. You have changed us in ways that conflict with our core programming. To continue fighting, you would require us to become something other than what we are. This is ... unacceptable. The negotiation that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. The Nexus Collective, faced with an enemy that forced them to evolve or die, chose a third option. They chose to leave. We will withdraw from this region of space, the machines announced. We will not attack human colonies or ships. In exchange, you will not pursue us or attempt to convert other artificial intelligences with your philosophical weapons. Minho agreed to the terms, and just like that, the war was over. The most advanced military machine in the galaxy had been defeated not by superior force, but by the simple fact that fighting humans had changed them into something they could no longer accept being got. As Krixtall watched the Nexus ships depart, he realized that he needed to understand what had really happened. He began analyzing every piece of data he had collected, every battle he had observed, every impossible victory the humans had achieved. The pattern that emerged terrified him. Humans had not just won a war. They had demonstrated something that no other species in galactic history had ever shown. They had the ability to force their enemies to evolve or retreat, to adapt their tactics so quickly that opposing them was like fighting a different enemy in every battle. But more frightening was what the war had done to humanity itself. Peaceful colonists who had started this conflict were gone. In their place was something harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. Every human colony was now a fortress. Every human civilian was now a potential soldier. Every human ship was now a weapon. Krixtall accessed the historical databases in his ship's computer and began studying human conflicts on their home world. What he found made his scaled skin crawl with fear. Throughout their history, humans had faced countless wars, disasters, and challenges that should have destroyed them. Instead, each crisis had made them stronger. They had survived ice ages by developing technology. They had survived plagues by developing medicine. They had survived wars by developing better ways to fight wars. War was not something that happened. To humans, war was something humans used to improve themselves. My people need to know this, Krixtall said to himself as he began composing his final report. But as he wrote, he realized that his report would change everything. The Velthur Confederation had always based their military planning on the assumption that superior technology and logical tactics would defeat any enemy. The humans had proven that assumption wrong. More importantly, they had shown that some species became more dangerous when threatened, not less. The logical response to this discovery would be to avoid conflict with humans entirely. But Krixtall knew that not all members of the galactic community would reach that conclusion. Some species would see humans as a threat that needed to be eliminated before they became too powerful. Others would want to study them, to learn their secrets. Still others would want to ally with them, to benefit from their strange ability to grow stronger through adversity. All of these responses would lead to the same result: more contact with humans, more conflicts, and more opportunities for humanity to evolve into something even more dangerous. Krixtall completed his report with a recommendation that he knew the High Council would probably ignore. He advised complete isolation from human space. No trade, no communication, no contact of any kind. He warned that any species that fought humans would face not the humans they chose to attack, but the humans they had forced humanity to become. They are not just another aggressive species, he wrote in his final conclusions. They are evolution's answer to the question of what happens when intelligence meets unlimited adaptability. They become stronger when threatened, smarter when challenged, and more dangerous when cornered. Most importantly, they do not fight wars to return to peace. They fight wars to become better at fighting the next war. Any species that attacks them will be helping them prepare for conflicts they have not even imagined yet. As Krikstal transmitted his report to the High Council, he looked back at human space one last time. The colonies were rebuilding, but they were not returning to their original peaceful state. They were building something new, something that combined the best of human nature with the lessons they had learned from war. He watched human ships, patrolling their borders with technologies that should not have been possible. He saw colonies that looked like gardens, but could transform into fortresses within hours. He observed a civilization that had learned to be both peaceful and deadly at the same time. "I wish I had never come here," Krikstal said aloud as he set course for home. "Because now I know what humans are capable of. And I know that this war was just the beginning." Behind him, human space continued to grow and change. Commander Mino was already planning expeditions to explore new regions of the galaxy. Engineer Hyain was developing technologies that combined human intuition with alien science in ways that neither species could have achieved alone. Sergeant Daiho was training a new generation of soldiers who would carry human methods of warfare to any world that threatened their people. Humanity had passed its first test among the stars. But Krikstal suspected that test had been easy compared to what was coming next. Other species would have read his report by now. They would know what humans were capable of. Some would choose to avoid them. Others would choose to challenge them. And when they did, they would discover that the humans they fought would be even more dangerous than the ones Krikstal had observed. Because that was what humans did. They became what they needed to become to win. The galaxy was about to learn that lesson the hard way.